On today's episode, we'll dive into agency profitability. Specifically, what do we mean when we look for agencies doing at least 15% EBITDA, and how owner salaries might impact this calculation?
All right, Wook. So oftentimes when we look at agencies and people talk about their profitability, it's really unclear how they're calculating it. And it's not quite apples to apples. So I think one of the things we'll dig into today is how we calculate, a normalized profitability. And I think, this starts first with understanding a couple of terms. The first being SDE, or seller's discretionary earnings, and EBITDA. And EBITDA is a term that gets thrown around a lot, but what it really means is earnings before interest, taxes, depreciation, and amortization. And I think it'd be worth kind of digging into each of those, and then kind of walking folks through how we look at SDE versus EBITDA.
Yeah, I think it's a very important distinction because we talk to a lot of agency owners who might be saying, oh, my agency is doing great, it has great margins, but it's not always clear what they mean. Whether, are they talking about their profit after paying them a market salary? Are they excluding their comp? Is that inflating their numbers? So, I think it's important to understand the difference between SCE and EBITDA.
Yeah, and one of the things when we're talking about numbers, I think it's always helpful to have clear illustrations, because I know we can throw out percentages and, kind of high level numbers, but I've always found it helpful. I'm sure you as well, of like seeing some concrete examples. And so, for our audience, we've put together a few kind of, things on a spreadsheet. So hopefully if you're a fan of spreadsheets, this is going to be fun. If you're not, we try to make it as simple as possible so that we can walk you through what we're thinking about.
Yeah, let's dig in.
Let's zoom in a little bit onto that initial one. Let's do it.
Sounds good. So this is a sample P&L, very basic P&L, looking at a business doing $1 million in revenue, 500,000 in COGS, so yielding a gross profit of $500,000.
And just to stop you there, like COGS, like what do we, when we look at an agency business, what are we typically thinking of when it's COGS and gross profit?
Yep. So COGS, so cost of goods sold. In this case would be the cost of the team that delivers the work for their clients. So depending on the company, that could be a majority of the team members that you have. So salaries, contractors, so employees or contractors, all included in this number. So things that could be excluded from this, if you have any administrative team members, sales team members, marketing team members that don't directly work on the delivery of client work.
Yeah. And, the calculation of gross profit is also a debatable point. I think a lot of people interpret in different ways, and there's a whole episode to be done on that. But, just for our purposes here, we'll just say basically revenue minus kind of delivery cost equals gross profit.
Yeah. All right. So below that, we have SG&A expenses. So general expenses across the business, everything else. So the marketing expense, software expenses, any office expenses, travel expenses, etc., capture there. And our assumption here is 100,000. Owner salary here at 150,000 to get to an EBITDA number of 250,000. So in this instance, when we're looking at SCE, you're adding back the owner salary again to get to a final SCE number. So here is 400,000, which is a 40% margin for this business.
Yeah. And so, one of the things you could, the scenarios you might see is sometimes an owner doesn't pay themselves a salary, like a fixed, amount that's going out every 2 weeks or every month, but, they're just taking distributions throughout the year, let's say. So just, on a profit. And so, they might not even have this owner salary number on their books. And instead, they're just taking what they can out of the SDE number, right?
Yeah. So effectively, the SDE would encapsulate all the owner distributions that would come out of the business.
Yeah. And one thing I just want to remind folks is like, just because your SDE is 400K doesn't mean you're pocketing 400K, because there is something to be paid to Uncle Sam, and so taxes, or wherever you pay your taxes if you're not in the U.S. But Yeah, definitely. That could take a big chunk also out of this SDE number.
Mhm, definitely. And it's not all distributed. You can obviously leave cash in the business to retain for future periods.
Correct. Okay.
No. Okay. All right. And then when we look at EBITDA, so on the right, we have a few scenarios to run through. Same assumptions for revenue, COGS, and gross profit, and for SG&A. But here we might see an owner's salary of 65,000 to get to an EBITDA of 335. So you can see, in this instance, the owner's salary we might consider is a little bit low for a business like this. So this may inflate an EBITDA percentage to 33.5, or we might see, and kind of scrolling through a few scenarios, owner's salary of 250,000, which might be considered high for a business of this size, which might depress the EBITDA to 15%, or you know maybe a right number here might be 150,000. That would get to 25%. So you can see, maybe comparing this version over here to the one on the left, the same salary, you can see the difference in margin between 40% and 25%. So very different numbers when just floating a margin, profit margin number. So it's really important to understand, is it EBITDA or is it SCE that is being referenced?
So yeah, in case you're just listening to the audio version of this, I think too low number is, if an owner is marking their salary, their base salary at $65,000 dollars, then they're gonna show an EBITDA of 33.5%, which is a high number, but that is kind of underestimating what it might what somebody in their place might be making. And we'll get back to that point in a second. And then in the middle scenario, the too high, if EBITDA is maybe, if the owner salary is too high, then the EBITDA gets depressed, right? So 250K salary might lead to a 15% EBITDA. And then for the third scenario, if you kind of peg owner salary 150%, your EBITDA might be at 25%. So kind of going back, like, how should we think about owner's salary? And I think this is really at the crux of the matter of, like, what does that really mean? And, how does this kind of tie to how we think about EBITDA at Barrel Holdings when we evaluate agencies?
We have a number of agencies that we really want to look at an apples to apples comparison when looking at a metric like EBITDA. So there is a bit of normalization. So we look at, if the owner, and typically in a company this size, the owner is involved in the day-to-day operations of the business and contributing in a meaningful way, whether it's the delivery of the work, the sales development, managing a team. So we're really thinking about what is the replacement cost of that person and making sure that's accurately reflected in the EBITDA. And depending on the size of the business, the salary could range. So that's something that we definitely want included in an EBITDA calculation, especially to understand, if that role were to be replaced, how much would we pay to have that person in that seat?
Yeah. So just to bring this home, if we start with kind of that first example where somebody was paying 65 thousand, let's say EBITDA, on their P&L, they marked their owner salary at 65,000. I mean, but they could have been paying themselves a distribution on top of that. But let's say we would have kind of gone in there and modeled it out to be like, hey, we should probably add another 90K to this so that it kind of normalizes at 150K owner salary. And so that would bring down the EBITDA from, effectively 33.5% to 25%. And so that's how we would kind of look at it. And then on the, the high salary version, if we thought, hey, we actually think, we could replace what the owner is doing with a leader who's making 150K base salary, then we might adjust it and add back another 100K to the EBITDA, which would then bump it up from 15% to 25%. So I think that's something to kind of keep in mind is, yeah, like, just because somebody says, hey, my agency, I'm doing 40% profit, that's you don't always get the full picture, and you kind of have to dig a little bit deeper in terms of, hey, are they talking about SDE? Are they talking about, are they properly accounting for what the replacement cost might be? And I would say like this is a matter of opinion too, right? Because some might argue, hey, like you shouldn't pay, an owner salary or a replacement salary anything below 200K, or some might feel like, hey, 100K is perfectly fine, and that's what the replacement um, salary should be. So I think here it's really where you land on what you think the appropriate owner salary is for that scale of agency.
Yeah. And when we say we're looking for agencies that do at least 15% of EBITDA, this is how we're looking at it. And we will kind of do the adjustments to get to our adjusted number if we do see those ranges where owner salary might be low, high, or it's being added back, entirely to the calculation.
Yep. And we're looking in this example. Obviously, it's a very small agency doing a million, but I think, and the swings are pretty big, right? So somebody a owner salary of 150K to 250K can really swing the EBITDA quite a bit. But I think one of the things to note is as the revenue scales up, it's a quite different story.
Yeah. So here's a scenario where all the numbers are essentially 10x, where the revenue is $10 million, the COGS are 5 million, gross profit is 5 million, SGA bumped up a bit for a business of this size to 2 million, and here owner salary of 300,000 to get to an SCE of 3 million or an EBITDA in our kind of calculation here at 2.7 million. And here the percentages get a lot closer. So it's 30% SCE versus 27% EBITDA. So at scale, the variance is gets much closer, where the owner salary is a much smaller component of the overall profitability of the business.
And you can argue, like in many cases, like when a business is super small, like we mentioned, the owner could be super involved, and so like their costs, the replacement costs becomes 99% of the time like an absolute necessity to kind of factor in. But when a agency is scaled up, it's very possible they have a very built out infrastructure with like a leadership team, and maybe they're they could be out of the day to day completely, and so in some instances, like owner salary could be zero as well, and that in that instance, like the seller's discretionary earnings could basically be equal to EBITDA.
Yeah, that's true. I think it's important to understand the business, the structure, and the role of the owner in that business, whether it's critical or very much not critical to the day-to-day operations. And that's where we can make the adjustments as needed. But really, here it's understanding what's the owner's role, what would it cost to replace that person, and that would give you, for us, a normalized view on profitability of the business.
Very good. So, yeah, and I think just to wrap this up, for anyone kind of thinking about how they talk about profitability at your agency, a good exercise is just to think about your own role as an owner in the agency and what you might have to pay to replace yourself. And I think that's always a calculation. Sei-Wook, you and I did that when we were running Barrel. We always kind of pegged a number, and so I think just playing with that and trying to see, hey, instead of SDE, what does EBITDA look like if I were to replace myself, and what is that appropriate salary? That's kind of a number to peg at. And at least when you have a discussion with us, that's you'll know that's the number that we're looking for. All right, so yeah, until next time, thanks for joining us, and have a good one.
Thanks.